podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Gergen, and today I am thrilled to have our very first guest interview. With me today, I have Karen Kennedy. She is a functional nutritionist, and she is just this amazing body of knowledge for all things metabolic health and CGM. So she uses CGMs with her patient, and we really dive into the ins and outs of things like glucotypes. We talk about inflammation and blood sugar. Karen has a book coming out called Hack Your Blood Sugar, and it's all about using a CGM. And I have to say that if I were to write a second book, this would be it. So I'm very thankful that Karen did it, so I didn't have to. And she is just a wealth of knowledge in the space. From a clinician standpoint, I'm actually a part of her mastermind Hive group, and I just learned so much from her as a consumer as well. So with that, we'll get right into it, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Karen Kennedy. Karen, welcome. How are you?
Kayla, I'm great. It's so good to talk to you today. I'm excited.
Yes, congratulations. I know the enduring process writing a book is, and now here we have Hack Your Blood Sugar. And I have to say, like, my thanks and gratitude to you, because I feel like writing a book is much like planning a wedding. Like, you have all of these big events and then it happens, and then all of a sudden your wedding comes, and then people are like, when are you having kids? But having kids is like, when are you going to write your
I
next
just
book?
did a whole thing. Right.
Yes. And I have to say that this, if I were to write a second book, it would be this. So thank you for taking that off of my plate, because you did it much better than I did. So Hack Your Blood Sugar with a CGM. I have my digital version. I have my paper version. It's already highlighted and dog-eared. And you've just been so generous with your knowledge. So I'm very thankful to be able to pick at that today and have you on the show.
Well, I mean, I got to say, you've been in my community for a long time. You know, we've had that Facebook community of other practitioners doing this, and now the Hive. And, you know, I started all that. I don't know if you know that, because, you know, I started doing the CGM stuff, and I was working in a vacuum. I don't like working in a vacuum. And so building that community where we could all share and compile knowledge was not only helpful to me, you know, just so we could all learn faster. But
There's
also
so many
being
amazing, smart people in that group. Every time I walk away, I'm like, wow, you don't know what you don't know. And I have my Post-it notes of things to look up or research papers to read. So thanks to you, I have like an inch stack of research papers sitting next to me that are still unread, maybe half read, but are all marked up.
They're printed out and ready to go, and that's what matters.
Exactly. So, and maybe for listeners who don't know you, can you share a little bit about yourself and like how you got started into nutrition?
Yeah. So I'm a functional nutritionist. My license, I'm a certified nutritionist over in Washington State, and then I have what do you call it? Board certified and integrative and functional nutritionist. But you know, going way back, this goes way back, because I saw your question of how I got started, and no one ever asks me that.
Really? Yeah.
You know, I worked in research initially. I was working in pharmaceutical and biotech research, in immunotherapeutics, and I loved it. Like, I really like research. It's a great field. It's fun work. But I was kind of getting more interested I was interested in health. That's what I was interested in. But I was getting more interested in how can people take more control of their own health and preventative, because I was in private industry doing research. It was a little different than academic research, but it was starting to get very, you know, financially motivated and moving away from the things that I thought were really important. Not that they were asking me, but, and at that time I just started learning. I was always a keen cook and interested in health. So I just got more interested in natural health and reading things. And then when I decided what I wanted to do, I realized that I had Bastyr University literally in my backyard. And they had a great master's in nutrition program that could get me licensure in the state of Washington to practice. And so it was like a really easy, well, it wasn't, you know, it's hard to quit your well-paid full-time job and then go to graduate school.
Right.
But that was the jump. That was the jump into nutrition.
Where does CGMs like fall into this? Where did you discover this during research, or was this on your own?
Yeah, well, I mean, so, you know, when I switched from research to going to Bastyr, that was in 1998. So I think most people, when they talk about how did you get into doing blood sugar and stuff, it's usually like a really personal story, but it's rarely a personal story for me because my personal stories are very boring to me. I think like a lot of healthcare providers, other people's problems are always so much more interesting. And it was Gerald Raven. It was Gerald Raven's Syndrome X, back in the 90s when he was really kind of rocking people's world in like, hey, it's hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance. That is what's driving a lot of these cardiometabolic risk factors. And that high insulin is being driven by carbs. And, I'm a 70s, 80s kid. So it was all carb. Carb was king back then. If it was fat-free, cholesterol-free.
Days, yes.
Yes. That Twinkie, or, that's low in fat, it's in. So it really flipped what we were doing. And so that got me interested. And I think that got me looking at, wow, we need to look at this differently. And, I was much later on, I was, when I was first practicing, I was practicing over in England because, kind of a tangent here, after I graduated from Bastyr, during that time, I met a guy and he was living in England and so I moved to England after I graduated and I was practicing over there. And so I had a private practice over there for some years. And I was always kind of looking through this lens of this Syndrome X because I started seeing it everywhere.
And just to clarify too, like when you say Syndrome X, that's what we know today as like metabolic syndrome.
As metabolic syndrome, yeah. Mm-hmm. So Syndrome X was, there's hyperinsulinemia, and that's leading to high triglycerides, low HDL, more risk of cardiovascular disease. And now, of course, that's described more broadly as metabolic syndrome, and we see, which often goes along with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. But I started looking at things through that lens of dysregulated blood sugar, whether people's blood sugar was kind of all over the place, tanking their energy, and you've probably seen in the book stories about people who are, women I would meet, as we do, in their 40s and 50s, and they're just like, the same thing isn't working. I can't lose weight. And
like when I go back to Weight Watchers and get my daily points, like things just aren't working.
Things aren't shifting
Need a new
anymore.
strategy.
Need a new strategy. Mm-hmm. But then the CGM came in because, as you know, working with humans, when you work with actual messy humans, what works for one person doesn't work for another. And you start seeing, especially if you have the kind of mind that you're always trying to like categorize everything, which I am.
So your researcher brain going, you're trying to like categorize and tag everything.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. And my daughter always says it's kind of like you're trying to organize all your stuffed animals by color, Mom.
Yeah.
And so you'd see these types, and you're like, it's kind of like this person is like this type, but I don't understand it. And then I thought, if I could just see what their blood sugar and insulin is doing, that would be great. But at the time when I was practicing, no one was getting a fasting insulin. I wasn't very good at accessing labs from people. We weren't on computers all the time. Just information was harder to come by for someone like me in private practice. And then I started practicing again. I took some time off. I worked for like a extension office, a university extension office, doing diabetes education for a while, I think that was back in 2005, here when I moved back to the States. And, jobs on diabetes stuff is usually really good, but it wasn't keeping up. And I was constantly going head to head with my supervisor saying, could we just tweak this a little and do this? Like, no, this is the program. This is part of a research thing. And so I've always felt like I was butting heads against that. And to be clear, I know how hard it is to create programs in public health information because you have to do a one-size-fits-all at a certain education level so it's accessible. But that said, that's not where my skill set is. That's not where I was happiest. So I just want to be clear. Public health, personal health, different things, both important, all right? But when I started getting back into practice, I was interested in this, and I saw people using CGMs.
I would imagine it was people with diabetes. Was that like your client base at this time?
No, this was I was hearing this, in like 2018, I was hearing about biohackers. I was hearing other doctors with really high-end clientele using CGMs. And I'm like,
They were expensive back then. Like, if people think they're expensive now, like, I don't know what a CGM went for back then, but I would imagine it had to be double the price.
I don't know, but I, you know how you make assumptions of, I don't know how they have to have a prescription, which I can't write, and it must be so expensive. I mean, how do we know how expensive it is? Because the pricing of things like that is so opaque. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I just kind of wrote it off as rich people tool. And I like to work with normal people. I don't work with celebrities or rich people. And that's fine.
I have to say that's one thing just to insert from your book that I really appreciate. It's like, how can we do this the cheapest? Or like, you're very practical in that sense.
Yeah.
I think you're very price conscious and trying to sort out like what is going to get you the most leverage on changing, if we choose A, B, or C, which one's going to get you the most mileage. So I really appreciate your simplification there. Mm-hmm.
I think it's important. I think there's a place for people who have unlimited resources because you learn a lot from the work that they do. But then let's just be serious. Like money doesn't grow on trees.
Yeah.
For the average person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then, and again, I wrote this in the book. It was just after the pandemic when gyms were starting to open back up again. At least in my neighborhood, I don't think the gym ever closed. But kind of after the pandemic, it was one of my first times back into the gym, and I was on a bench. I can kind of picture it. I was on a bench in between sets as you're kind of waiting to recover in between sets of something, and I looked up, and on that screen was an ad by Freestyle Libre saying, do a free trial of our CGM. And I'm like, free trial? I get up my phone, I'm like, I got it. I got a free CGM. But then I looked at it and I still needed a prescription. And I thought, there's always a catch. But then I texted my doctor, who is actually a friend and a colleague, and I'm like, would you write me a prescription for this? And she said, yes. Really? Just like that? She goes, yeah. They're pretty cool. They're really useful. More people should use them. Yeah, sure, here. And so I thought, well, great, now I have a free one. And I took my prescription and I went to the pharmacy and I picked it up. I got my free one and then I got another one. And when I saw how much it cost me, cash without insurance, I thought, I have been not doing this all this time when I thought this would be hard to get and expensive. And that single CGM after the free one cost me $40.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And it is like you said, it's hard when you don't have that tangible data. Like, you can talk about blood sugar all day, but it's really hard to, like, we can kind of visualize what might be happening or kind of buffering some of the spikes. But until you really have that, it's difficult to get motivated. Mm-hmm.
And that changed everything, because also not only is it difficult to be motivated, but as you know, when we're working with our patients and we see them eating a certain way, especially someone in my generation, when I see them eating the cereal, the typical, like the Special K, the skim milk, the orange juice and coffee, and I'm like, that is not a great breakfast for you. That is really spiking your blood sugar. I think that is the problem. And that when it flies in the face of everything you've learned that is healthy, it's very hard to uproot that when they don't have evidence. But now, as you know, I just have my patient start using it, use it for a few days, and then we meet and start looking at their data and talking about it. And the first thing is, look at my cereal. It's always awful.
Yes, Raisin Bran's like the number one offender that I've seen, and you just think like Raisin Bran is healthy, right? Or we have the folks that do Raisin Bran with extra sugar on top too, and oh my gosh, I think that's the one cereal hands down that I've seen just send people to the moon and back.
Of course, because you have the cereal and milk plus the added raisins.
Yes, you've got that liquid vehicle that just pushes everything through even faster.
Yeah. Then they're saying, what else could I have for breakfast? What else could I try? And then it like creates this vacuum. Rather than me pushing against a wall, they're like, tell me, give me the good stuff now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For you, were you looking for any certain symptoms? Like, were you having anything in particular that you were hoping to troubleshoot? Like with that first Libre?
In myself?
Mm-hmm.
I was so focused on the tech that
Gotcha.
I was looking to troubleshoot the process of getting, installing, logging, interpreting, and then I was just completely taken up in the tech. But I'll tell you, I quickly, like the next step, as soon as I figured it out, and this was like, there was no education outside of like diabetes education, like for type 1, there wasn't access. So I was on YouTube, but it was me and the Freestyle Libre customer service reps. I called them every day. So if I wanted to do this, how would I do this? And I'm looking at this on my screen. They had a very different app back then, and it was very, very unhelpful. And it's much better now. They just relaunched. But I very quickly pulled together about 10 people, some friends and some patients, and got them on. And we did like a 3-month like beta together, where we just met every week, because I wanted to see, could I write letters to their doctors? How easy would it be for me to convince someone to write a prescription? What would they need? And then get people on it and sharing data. And I mean, I had never seen other people's data. It wasn't in the literature. People weren't publishing, so I had to just use random friends and patients as research.
You mentioned cereal. Were there any other common threads? Like once you had this group,
coffee.
Was there anything? Okay.
And before you say, not the coffee, it's what people put in their coffees. And we're on the West Coast. And so in my world, the afternoon latte or frappuccino is what I dub the Pacific Northwest meal replacement. And so if a latte, which is an espresso with a whole cup of milk in it, that just jacks up people's blood sugar, and people were horrified by that.
And then you get the caramel or something like else in there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so people, the conversation, whenever I do a group program, the first question is always, what do I put in my coffee? What do I put in my coffee? And that's always, I'm always
like,
ready.
What do you take out of your coffee? Yeah.
It's not the coffee per se. Yeah. It's all the other stuff that goes.
Yes. Are you a creamer with a splash of coffee person, or are you the other way around?
Yeah. If you're just putting a splash of something in there, aside from a caramel shot, you could get away with most things. But
yeah. Well, and I know you were kind of alluding to it earlier, talking about, I think you were hinting at glucotypes, like you saw different types of people. Yeah. That's something that you've mentioned in the book. We've talked about it in your mastermind group, which that just really, I think, rocked my world in the best of ways, and something that I've implemented with a lot of my folks, because like you had said, once you get a CGM on somebody and you're like, ooh, now they're going to be super motivated once they see all this. But then I've had a few folks where it's like we put a CGM on, I'm like, why aren't they spiking from the 2 pieces of bread and a cookie? And then you had brought up glucotyping and how that specific glucotype, like, okay, not that the CGM's not helpful, but we're not getting maybe that negative feedback loop like we might be with somebody else. So can you give us like Glucotype 101?
Yes.
Like, how did you come up with that concept?
So Glucotype 101, it was a lot of that. So it was, why is this person who objectively, I know there's an issue with blood sugar here, but it's not showing up. They have high insulin, high triglycerides. I know there's something going on.
Lots of belly fat. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we're not getting the blips. And I'm thinking, what's happening there? And then you get people who don't have any of that metabolic syndrome. They're lean, all their labs look good, but their blood sugar is really spiky. They have an elevated A1C. And I'm thinking, wow. And that's kind of those are the polar opposites. And so that's where the glucotypes came in. And I'll say the term, I did not coin the term glucotype. When I double checked again, I think the first person I saw using it was out of Michael Snyder's lab down at Stanford. That might have been the first time I saw. And there's a 2018 article. And what they were doing, so they will use more tech. They're the lab that's looking at a lot of CGM data, and they work with Google. They're pairing with a large language model to really deep phenotype people. They're looking for glucotypes or metabolic phenotypes. And so what they're doing is they're using some computing power to just take the glucose curves after a standard meal, and based on the size and shape of the curve, they're applying a glucotype. So that's where it came from. But let me give you the Glucotype 101.
You're talking about variability on that first little piece, right? Like if somebody, like how responsive or how spiky they are.
How spiky, how long it takes like you could just spike up and come straight back down, or you could go up and then it takes a long time to come back down. Those are the two extremes, or it never doesn't come up very much. And so at the 3 different people, all with an A1C of 6.2, so prediabetes, can have totally different glucose profiles. 5 people with prediabetes, an A1C of 6.2, could also have totally different glucose profiles. And it's because there's so many variables in our bodies that impact glucose and how we respond to food. And it's very hard for the human brain to deal with so many variables, which is why we'll use large language models to do this, because that's what it's very good at. But in the book, in what I do, because I'm dealing with humans and my limited brain, and I want a simple way to make clinical decisions that are going to impact a person. So when I'm thinking about glucotypes, it's as simple as like a 2x2. And the one is that person insulin sensitive or the insulin resistant? And of course, that's a sliding scale. Because if you're more insulin resistant, have more hyperinsulinemia, then that puts you in that metabolic syndrome, the syndrome X, metabolic syndrome. So that's the first factor. How insulin resistant are you? And there's different ways of being insulin resistant. There's muscle insulin resistance and liver insulin resistance and adipose tissue. But that's too much for the human brain. So insulin resistant is one axis. And then the other one is beta cell function. And so for your listeners who don't know what beta cells are the pancreatic cells that produce insulin. And so it's basically, how good is your pancreas at making insulin? So at one extreme would be type 1 diabetes. And I want to say, I'm actually not talking about type 1 diabetes. That's not my zone of genius. It's a different disease. There's some overlap. But people with type 1 diabetes don't produce insulin. And so they need supplemental insulin. But that would be an extreme. So when I'm talking about beta cell dysfunction, again, there's a lot of things that play into this, like incretins and more pancreatic insulin resistance because of high insulin, high glucose. But basically, is your pancreas not great? Like, has it kind of lost its love of the job and it's not producing as much? Or for some people, they might lose first phase insulin production because we produce insulin in a few phases. And some people, for genetic reasons or otherwise, it's kind of like they're delayed. They'll eat like a little bit of an apple, glucose goes in, and then insulin comes in. And that amount of time, glucose will shoot up, and then their insulin will come in and bring it right down, and then we're good. But it was a little late to the party.
Get some people like this, it's almost like a double bump when they eat. Like they go up, they start to come down, and they're like, well, what was that second bump? Like what happened there? And a lot of times it's just not recognizing, like, okay, insulin comes out in these waves, essentially.
Yeah.
So you're talking glucotypes. We're mapping essentially how much insulin is your pancreas putting out, and then how well are you utilizing that to kind of summarize the two. Gotcha.
You said that much better than I did. Exactly. And so that, when you think of a 2x2, that kind of gives you 4 squares. But 4 squares just kind of wasn't enough. I really wanted something more descriptive, and I wanted to give a chance for people to see the progress, because some of this is very reversible and some of it is not reversible. So we have the person who's fine, who their pancreas is producing all the insulin, and they don't have insulin resistance. They're very fit and healthy, metabolically sound. And so they're fine. So that's one, fine. And then you sort of have 2 tracks. You have largely the insulin resistance track, which goes into, little insulin resistance and then metabolic syndrome. And then sometimes advances to prediabetes. And then you have the beta cell dysfunction track, which is that slow starter who is a little late to the party producing insulin. And often that person, very often, we talked about it earlier, everything looks fine. Their labs look fine. They're lean. They do all the right things, but they just get really spiky glucose. They're very sensitive to carbohydrates. And sometimes there's nothing, there's nothing bad about that as long as they eat kind of low carb and eat in harmony with their metabolism. They're good. But it's worrisome because sometimes their A1C will be a little bit higher.
And that's where the physician goes, let's just keep an eye on it, right?
Let's just keep an eye on it, which can be sensible, but a CGM is a great tool for those people because they can see what their tolerance is and what meals work. Now, those people who have a little beta cell dysfunction like that are more prone to advancing to type 2 diabetes. Because we think of type 2 diabetes and the only metrics we use is fasting blood sugar and A1C. It's very glucose-centric, ignoring insulin completely. And so if one of those people whose insulin production is not as good as it could be, but they're eating the standard American diet and not getting enough exercise, that person will progress to type 2 diabetes for sure, and much more quickly.
Yeah. Well, do you have any insight? I know you're kind of embedded deep into the community, like this glucose-centric testing. Do you think fasting insulin will ever just be part of the protocol? It's not like it's an expensive test.
I know. And that we should talk about that, the tests and the cost of them. But I don't know. I hope so. When I was at the meeting, Diabetes Technology meeting in San Francisco last fall, and it's a very good meeting of policy researchers and physicians and a handful of nutrition practitioners who get completely overlooked as if we're not part of it. But it's great. And I hear them talking about this a lot. But I don't know. I didn't hear anybody saying this definitely should be part of our standard thing. We should cover with insurance. And that's the question is, will insurance cover it?
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think even out of pocket, it's a $20 test, maybe. You probably have your finger on the pulse in terms of cost more, but.
I think, I probably put it, I don't know if I put it in here. I want to say insulin is an $11 test. But of course, this is where, and this is kind of one of the exciting things I hope people get from the book is some of these empowering tools. I talk about labs that you can how to self-order your labs. Because, and this is something I've recently, in the last couple of years have learned as a practitioner, that the way labs are priced is for insurance billing and for cash. And if let's say you order some labs, like you want to get a fasting insulin, and you ask your doctor to order it for you, and your doctor says, okay, but your insurance probably won't cover it. And you say, fine. Same thing with vitamin D. Your vitamin D won't be covered until you have osteoporosis or until you're over 60 or something. So let's say they put an fasting insulin and a vitamin D on my lab. And I can tell you my insurance won't cover it. I've been there. That vitamin D is going to cost me, I think it was costing me $90 to $100. Mm-hmm. And my insulin, I think it's going to be around $50. But if I do a cash lab, that insulin I believe is $11. And the vitamin D is in the 20s, maybe 30. It's there's a 90% markup when they bill insurance. So if your insurance covers it, you're gold. But if your insurance declines it, then you're paying the price they bill the insurance company, which is high. So that's why I like doing these cash labs. I'll order cash labs, or my patients can order it themselves. They can get what they want and then take the results to their doctors and say, I got this. Let's work on this. So that's why I encourage those cash labs, because it really, kind of like a CGM, it gives people information that they need to make decisions.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even outside of like having the extra labs, I know we can see specific trends like on someone's CGM. Is there anything when you're looking at a patient's data, when does your yellow or red flag go up? Like when you're thinking insulin resistance, like what are you looking for? What metrics are you watching for?
When I'm thinking insulin resistance, let's go back to your person where you said this person like is eating bread and all these things and their blood sugar isn't jumping up.
And so I wanted some reinforcement.
I wanted some backup here.
Yeah.
And so it's exactly that person that I thought, okay, I need a standard set of metrics that help us define glucotypes so we can quickly say this way or that way. And so I actually before looking at somebody's CGM data, I want to look at some other basic things so I can view their CGM data through the lens of a potential glucotype. So before your patient even goes on that, we'll be able to look at someone's labs that they already have. And they'll always have a lipid panel, and we can always ask for a waist measurement. And so what we're thinking of is, what are the criteria for diagnosing metabolic syndrome? Like, we already have a diagnostic criteria that's published and accepted for metabolic syndrome, and that is 3 of the following, and one is a waist circumference of a certain amount for women and then different for men. It's triglycerides being elevated, it's HDL being lowered, it's slightly elevated A1C or fasting glucose, and it's that
blood pressure is that,
and blood pressure elevated. Mm-hmm. So as I've worked with people over the years, and I've looked at some of those metrics together with their CGM data, I saw that while triglycerides have often had a cutoff of 150, I think more recently 120, I see 100 as a real cutoff for more of that hyperinsulinemia. If triglycerides are over 100, I'm already thinking there's some blood sugar, a higher insulin. And of course, HDL, if HDL is, we want that a little bit higher. So we're looking at a triglyceride HDL ratio. So that's data almost everybody has, unless they've never been to a doctor. And then a waist. Whenever someone comes and sees me on the intake form, I always see if they'll just do a waist measurement. And so if we have those 2 things, and both of those that's the yellow flag. And if I see that, and I see CGM data, and they're having a turkey sandwich with 2 slices of bread and some chips, and it's staying under 140, I know that they are producing a lot of insulin, but they might not have a lot of insulin resistance yet. So it tells me we've caught this at a really sweet spot. That person is usually overweight, but people respond to that hyperinsulinemia differently depending on their genetics. So that person is their person's pancreas is going to produce insulin all day long. No matter what we give it, that person's pancreas is going to have them. It's going to have
the
their
compensator. Back. This is like, for my folks, I feel like I've kind of renamed that a little bit. The compensator. It's like your pancreas is it's cranking out that insulin, like you said. Mm-hmm.
I love that phrase. It makes me think they're like it's the enabler.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you're like, okay, well, I can keep eating my sandwich with 2 slices of bread and chips and be just fine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think of it as masking blood sugar problems. So when you have that, we have that mask, and I'll explain that you're super, I'm saying enabling, your compensating insulin is masking blood sugar problems. And so I look at their CGM data through that lens. And similarly, if I have someone who has none of those signs, and I'm seeing their really spiky blood sugar, I'm like, okay, this is a lack of insulin. There's no metabolic dysfunction. Really what we need to do is just keep them eating in alignment with their blood sugar, with their ability to deal with it. But, in terms of what to do, and then it's, well, what to do next? Like, what about this person who their blood sugar looks fine on a CGM, they're producing insulin until the cows come home? Often, if the CGM is not our ally in this one, then it goes in the trash. It's no longer a helpful metric, and that's when we kind of have to rest in other markers. We don't have a continuous insulin meter. I don't know if we'll ever have to never say never, but it's not. I don't think it's in the pipeline. But we have other great metrics to track insulin. So first of all, in terms of what to advise them, that's when we go old school and just say, let's keep those carbs down. Exercise, build muscle, enough protein, lots of fiber, and moderate carbs. So we're working that, and the CGM isn't going to be a good feedback for them.
Mm-hmm. What would you say, like, percent-wise, how often are you seeing this? Like, your patient population, is this 30% of people, 10%?
It's very low because they're not coming to me because their blood sugar looks great. People come to me when their blood sugar is bumped up.
And we should clarify too, I would say, like, with this compensating from the pancreas, like, that only lasts for so long. Like, your pancreas, I would say for most folks, right?
For most folks.
Eventually that beta cell function is going to decline, and that's where we see like the multi-system. I don't know how you categorize this glucotype. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but maybe that's just type 2 diabetes.
I call it type 2 diabetes with metabolic syndrome.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when we think about the diagnosis criteria, and what's interesting is I heard in in the field, they are pushing to get rid of the term prediabetes because they think it encourages apathy in medical providers and in individuals. So people aren't watching the A1C and using A1C as the metric in terms of when this is at a certain point, now we take action. One, the A1C, we should all get an A1C. It's a nice metric to have. But for these people, it catches them way too late because by the time their A1C goes up, they have been exposed to high insulin, their blood pressure's been going up. It causes so much inflammation and metabolic damage. It has pushed them closer to cardiovascular disease without any intervention. And so it's just not serving people, which is why when we get in there and we're looking, if they would just run a fasting insulin and be looking at that 100 triglyceride cutoff. And
we just need this $11 lab. For the love of God, can we get...
Or even the triglycerides in the waist circumference. We're already doing that. So for anybody listening, if you're like, well, I'm going to just go look at your triglycerides. Are they over 100? And measure your waist circumference. I can't remember what the cutoff is.
I believe is it 35 inches for women or 39 for men? Something I know it's like different. Something in that ballpark.
Yes. So if you're seeing that, then, high insulin might be the thing going on for you. And if you use a CGM and you're like, oh, my blood sugar looks fine. I'll tell you, early on in a group program I did, there was often couples will do my group program, which is fun and entertaining. She was doing it because her husband had type 2 diabetes. They actually did an interview with me, which was interesting. She was fine. She didn't have diabetes. She didn't have any pre-diabetes, but interestingly, her insurance covered her CGM at that time, which was very strange and helpful. But her blood sugar looked fine. If she was working with me one-on-one, I would have just canned the CGM. I said, well, everything looks fine. But she was dialing it in a bit because I said, hey, for this week, everyone, why don't you just dial it in and really see, keep your carbs more moderate, do all these things and see how you feel. Let's see how things go. She's like, I barely took any ibuprofen this week. She's always taking ibuprofen for pain. She slept better. And she started losing weight. And she's like, and that's where I thought, oh, maybe I should pay more attention to these people because I think she was one of those people who would have slipped through my early cracks before I started really looking through the lens of a glucotype before I looked at someone's CGM data.
Yeah. Well, and you bringing that up too, I know you talk about the different factors like food or non-food factors that influence blood sugar. And I think one thing that I never appreciated enough that you've talked about a lot is inflammation. To like, what's the connection there between inflammation and blood sugar? Like, I would imagine this patient that you just mentioned in particular, like joint pain, like there's a connection to that there. Can you speak on the inflammation blood sugar connection? You
kind of just said it. It's bi-directional. So in this case, eating sugar is fairly inflammatory. But when we have higher levels of insulin, this hyperinsulinemia, this syndrome X or metabolic syndrome, having high insulin tells the body to store fat in a slightly different place. Generally, we store fat in the subcutaneous, which is just under the skin. That's the pinch and inch kind of fat that we get. And I call that vanity fat because it doesn't have it's not going to have as big of an impact on your metabolic cardiovascular health. You're going to have to buy new jeans. But then we can store it in the visceral fat, which is that deep fat around the organs and includes fat we store in our pancreas and our liver. And when you have high insulin, chronically high insulin, not acute insulin, like up and down, which is a healthy insulin, get it stored, take it back down. But when it's chronically high, then we're storing more visceral fat. And when we have that visceral fat, or VAT, visceral adipose tissue, that acts as its own little endocrine organ secreting inflammatory cytokines. And for your listeners, I don't love that we had COVID, but because we did, people know it's inflammatory cytokines. We have that cytokine storm. So these are chemicals that the immune system uses to communicate. And when they're secreted from these fat cells, it tells the immune system, aha, it's time to act. So it puts your immune system on its A game unnecessarily, and that causes global inflammation. So more pain, Yeah, more pain and achiness, inflammation, brain fog.
Then you've got high inflammation, you've got more visceral fat, which then is like pouring out more of these like
Yes.
cytokines, and it's just this horrible
Yes.
vicious
And so
cycle.
the cycle is because when you have high levels of inflammation, it raises your blood sugar and makes you more insulin resistant. And that, because I was putting people in group programs and doing this just after the shutdown, anytime I had a 4-week group program going on, someone got COVID, which was so interesting because they would be ticking along. Maybe their fasting blood sugar was 95 and they would do something. And as soon as they got sick, their fasting blood sugar of 95 turned into a fasting blood sugar of 120, like a big jump.
Wow.
And then and then spikier from there, because that's what inflammation does to your blood sugar. And I think, this might be helpful for your readers to hear on the lines of inflammation. A common phone call I get or a text I get from friends is, oh, I just got my labs back and my A1C was 6.2. It's never been high. I think I might have diabetes. And I'm like, and I'll get on the phone, I'll call them. Because remember, the A1C gives you your average glucose over the past 3 months. What's an indirect measurement? And I said, over the last 3 months, were you sick? Oh, I had the worst flu of my life. That flu raised your blood sugar, and it's probably back down now. So that's why your A1C is high. So think of when you got better, count forward 3 months, and let's schedule a follow-up lab then, and I'll bet your A1C is lower. Same thing if people are getting, like if you get a cortisone injection, like in a shoulder for pain, or have to take steroids for any,
Oh yeah, prednisone. I've seen this just wreak havoc. I think, in fact, circling back to the beginning, I had someone who had just started prednisone and then had Raisin Bran or something, and it was like, normally she looked beautiful, barely jumped out over like 140, and she shot right up to 250, like for her blood sugar. It was wild. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I often tell people if they're on a temporary course of corticosteroids or they get sick, I recommend they just don't use a CGM, because no one needs to see that. It's just frustrating, and there's not much you can do other than just taking care of yourself.
Yeah. What is your tip, like kind of speaking on that a little bit? Because I see a lot of folks just try to gamify or keep things as flat as possible.
Yeah.
Like I know sometimes there's just some head games that go into the data, like you want to be a good patient and have nice numbers.
Right.
But I see sometimes like some people are getting really stressed out, like whether that's related to a wonky sensor. Sometimes I see that data backfire. Like what is your advice to folks there?
Well, and I talk about this in the book, what I always call the rookie move. And I've done this when I haven't used a CGM in a while, and I'll put it in. I'm like, oh, I did it. Is when you put a CGM on, you immediately want to flatten that curve. You want to have the best glucose. First, that is a total rookie move for a few reasons. It's very frustrating, and you lose the opportunity to collect baseline data. So that's why in the book I outlined the system I use. There's a process to doing this that gives you the best information, reduces stress, and it means you can use fewer continuous glucose monitors and get this information. And so the first stage is for at least a week, maybe 2, it's as if you didn't know it was on and you didn't think anyone was looking, and you're just eating, drinking, and living as you always do. But at the same time, you're logging, you get in there and you're logging stuff. And then you see what's what. Because some things might be fine and some things might not be, and you get an idea of, where should I start first? What's important? So that's the first stage. You've got to collect that baseline data. You have to see it. And then, in terms of getting kind of freaked out about the data, when I work with people, and in the book, I think it's very important early on to know what your goals are and to know what normal looks like. So we'll talk about, those low and level overnight, staying in range most of the time, and people's target ranges will differ. If people have severe hyperinsulinemia, you have a tighter range. If they have dysautonomia, we have a tighter range. Athletes, professional athletes have a wider range because of their needs. So, but we kind of start with the general range, and then lately, because of research that came out last year that I think is very helpful, I show them pictures of what a normal physiological response is to rice, to beans, to berries, to, bread, to potatoes. And I see people, and this is why I like people to use it on their own for 2 or 3 days, and then we meet, so that they have a little information, but they haven't had time to really stress out about it. Because I see, now that I show this to people, let me show you this data, and they go, oh,
that is so helpful too. Yes, your chart that you shared.
It was me. And so for those listening, that's a 2025 article by Ahmed Metwali out of the Snyder Lab in Stanford. And yeah, it's very nice because everybody says, oh, what rice? I really spike with rice. I think there's something wrong with my blood sugar. And when you show them, like, everybody spikes with rice. Like, that's a thing.
Thanks to you, I made a slide on that. Like, for newer people or my cohort, I'm like, rice doesn't have a personal vendetta against you. It's not you.
It's not you, it's rice.
The rice. Yes, exactly.
Oh, I see that as a really nice, like, meme, or it's not you, it's the rice.
Maybe we'll pull that quote or something. Yeah.
It's not you. It's me. It's like a little rice grain saying, it's me. It's not you. It's me. Yes. Yes. And it's very helpful to know what is normal physiological response and what is pathological. And, it's because that data hasn't been out there very long that we don't know that. And certainly if you're a layperson, nobody's told you. Like, how would you know?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, and shifting kind of from CGM to book, I would imagine you did an insurmountable amount of research for this. Was there any rabbit hole that you went down that you weren't well, I'm sure there's multiples, but was there a rabbit hole in particular that sticks out that surprised you?
Well, the one they were talking about, these glucotypes, that was a never-ending one. But two that stuck out that surprised me is one, this just points out bias that you develop over time, was apple cider vinegar. So I have poo-pooed apple cider vinegar forever. Like people take shots of it. It's not good for your teeth. Oh, please. I've never recommended it. It has some solid data behind it. Like in meta-analysis, they're showing like 12 weeks of drinking like 10 milliliters of it. Not with a meal, like any old time during the day, taking your shot can lower some glucose metrics for people.
Well, and from a functional standpoint, it can help just with like natural digestion too, like stimulating stomach acid and things. This is a rabbit hole I've wanted to go down, so I'm glad you brought this one.
So it's a twofer. Yeah. And
right.
It's kind of like walking after a meal or not eating 2 to 3 hours before bed. You get twofers out of all of them. It does a couple of different things. So that was interesting. But the other one was because I decided in the like 8 levers that I was going to include in the book of the levers of improving your blood sugar. The 8th one is natural products, which is a whole book in and of itself, and I covered a few. So I did a bunch of research on a lot of them, and I had to figure out what to include in there. I was surprised how much data was on things, and curcumin surprised me.
Interesting. Well, and that kind of ties back to the inflammatory process.
Mm-hmm. And oxidative stress at curcumin is so important. And it makes you realize how much of that is going on in there. And it might be is it that inflammation is a root cause for people, or is it just there's an inevitable increase in inflammation and oxidative stress going on once you have this insulin, if you have the insulin resistance, and you're going to have some fatty liver. And that curcumin is very nice at protecting the liver and reducing oxidative stress and increasing some detoxification pathways. So I think that was a very interesting one. And so if I get somebody with, especially if they have overt markers of inflammation, if I'm seeing that elevated neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, which most people have paid for by their insurance from their complete blood count, or if they just pop a lot of ibuprofen, and some people will just say, I am inflamed. I do not need a lab to tell me I am inflamed. Then sometimes that curcumin is a really nice supplement for them, and it, again, does double duty. If they are 2 different things, it does double duty.
I've seen like something like inflammation. It's something that's not always apparent. I'm thinking of one client in particular. She went in for physical therapy and they were doing their assessment before the session. They were asking her, okay, what's your pain? Like, doing the scale. And she's like, oh my gosh, I don't have any. You had mentioned a couple things like, okay, well, reducing intake of ibuprofen or something like curcumin. Like, I feel like inflammation is one of those silent things, like whether it's there, but sometimes you don't realize that it's missing until you're
because
like,
you're
oh.
used to it.
Right.
I mean, for example, I didn't know if I had a lot of inflammation, but last year, because I had a really tough 2025, I was writing this book, and right at the beginning of the writing, we had a lot of severe family medical things. My father died, and so the gym wasn't happening, and I was eating out of a hospital, and all of a sudden, every time I passed anything that was sweet, I was like, I'll just have a bit of that. And so in September, when my pants didn't fit anymore, I went on my operation, get my pants to fit again. And one of them was no more sugar. Once a week, I will have my Ben & Jerry's ice cream that I share with my husband, and that is my sweet for the week. And what I didn't realize was how much pain. I knew I had some chronic pain things. They just went away. And I have still today, knock on fake IKEA furniture, that has improved things. So I agree that it's that frog in boiling water. We don't realize how much pain or inflammation we're in because it feels sort of normal. But just dropping that sugar makes a big difference.
And kind of your writing process, like going through doing the research, was there anything, like, have you started apple cider vinegar, or is there anything that you've changed in your day, like whether it's a supplement or how you eat now that your knowledge base has grown even more?
Interesting. I think you'll understand this. While I was doing the research, I tried a lot of things. In fact, this might be of interest. I had a diagnosis of prediabetes. My A1C since I was like 50 has been like 5.7, 5.8. And I thought, and I have diabetes in my family, lots of it. But I thought, I'm fit, I'm different, I'm special. And then over the last summer, what I did is I went on I was on curcumin for a while. I did all the stuff, but I just really dropped my carbs, starches. I didn't have bread. I didn't have any refined carbs. I would have some starchy vegetables and some fruit, but I really did a good job, and I did it for 3 months. And then I rechecked my A1C after 3 months in the fall, and my A1C went up. Yeah, and this has happened to my patients. And I thought, okay. So here's the deep dive I ended up doing, and you'll recognize this because I talked about it a lot. I ordered myself an oral glucose tolerance test with insulin response. And so for those of you listening, if you've had a baby, if you've been pregnant, you might have been offered an oral glucose tolerance test where you drink the little Sprite sugary drink fasted. But before that, you get your glucose tested, and then at certain time points, you get your glucose tested again. So the way I ordered it is I ordered both that glucose tolerance test, but I ordered 4 time points. And I ordered 4 time points of insulin because I thought, I'm a fairly lean person. Do I have low insulin production? What's going on? And I thought, this is a definitive test. So I ordered that. I did it with my friend Julene. We went in together. We did crossword puzzles while we were waiting for our time points. So it ended up being a fun day. And then we went out for lunch. But I got that test back. And much to my surprise, I had textbook perfect blood sugar and insulin response. Like when I looked at all the examples of what it should look like, that was mine. And I'm like, and my trig list, everything was fine. But my A1C was going up. And then, of course, I went into the phase of, what's the deal with A1C now? Mm-hmm. Because I was ordering this for more of my patients because they were freaking out with their elevated A1C. And I was saying, I think it's good. I talked to other colleagues. What do you think? They're like, it's fine. They're fine. But I knew they needed some kind of reassurance. I'm like, let's do the oral glucose tolerance test with insulin. We're going to do it, which, by the way, is a relatively inexpensive test. You're in there for 2 hours. But I want to say it's like ended up being like $40 to do that test.
Wow. With the insulin too.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of times we're just looking at glucose. So you have to be specific in ordering the insulin with that.
Because everything is a glucose-centric diagnostic. We have to put the insulin because we want to look, is insulin slow coming up? Is it coming up enough? Mm-hmm. Is it staying high? So that's what I just wanted to see it. And I just put it to bed. And I've decided I don't have prediabetes. I don't know what's going on with my A1C. It was probably stress or dehydration over the summer, but it's probably stress for me.
Right. So are you waiting like a certain amount of time and then rechecking this summer, for example?
I have eliminated that from my thoughts at all. It's
Yeah.
not a concern of mine. It's obviously when I try, it goes up.
And stress doesn't help blood sugar. No.
Stress, and I think
Yeah.
I'm fine. And like I
Yeah.
tell my patients, I think you can take this off of your list to be concerned about for now. I have other more interesting and more important things to put my worrying mind to. My blood sugar is not it. As long as I think I do well not having sugar during the week and having my Ben and Jerry's at the end of the week. I get good results from that. I have lots of other genetic markers that are going to make my life difficult in the coming years. So
Right.
mostly cardiovascular genetic things. And that's, I think, at a certain point, we have to decide, have I done my due diligence on my blood sugar? Can I just say, I can coast on that, and I'm going to focus on these things because that's more important.
And I think this is a good example of how like us as practitioners are not immune to a lot of the challenges that our patients are experiencing
Right.
too. So
And honestly, me
Yes.
going through that process has been very beneficial because I get a lot of people who come to me as very healthy, but their A1C has popped up and they can't figure out what to do about it. And so me having gone through that whole rigmarole, including the emotional part of it, I think really serves me and my patients well because I'm able to, I can really relate to that feeling. And I know when someone just needs an oral glucose tolerance test so we can put it to bed and we can give that to their doctor and say, because the doctor sees that and they know that that is the gold standard for them. So, no, they don't need metformin. No, they don't need those things. They just need to get on with their life and stop worrying about their blood sugar.
yeah, and you've done such a fantastic job for both patients and clinicians and practitioners like myself. Like you've just created so many things like your book. I just love. And this has a permanent spot on my bookshelf. You do a really good job, I would say, of bringing someone to point A to point B, but you do a great job of speaking to the average consumer, but then also adding things in for clinicians. I love all your visuals. You have a lot of patient stories too. And I found myself eating those up because I was connecting the dots between some of my people too. And I was like, yes, but you've really,
And you can thank my
expanded.
editor for that. Yvonne, I worked with master book builders as, I'm self-published, as you know, but self-published doesn't mean I did it by myself. I tried that for a year and it did not work. And I would say Yvonne, who's the developmental editor on that, stepped in and said, this is boring. We need case studies. We need patient studies. We need to be able to read this so it's interesting. And so, big thanks go to her because she actually taught me how to do a narrative nonfiction style of writing.
And I saw Glucotype production or publications. Is that right? I was like,
That's me.
Yes, I didn't notice that in my digital version or your beta readers.
Let me give credit because I was trying to figure out what do I name. I'm supposed to name my publishing company something. And I was like, what would be a good thing? And I was thinking of stuff and it was all taken. And it was Ashley Koff. She said, oh, you should just call it Glucotype. And I'm like, of course I should. Thank you, Ashley. So
Does this
she
mean
named
that
it.
you'll be coming out with like a second edition or like an expanded?
Right? Well, I would love to because I'll tell you the most unexpected thing that came from this process was me realizing I love writing. Even for a while I was getting up at 4 a.m. to just write with my coffee for 2 or 3 hours before my day. Best life.
Yeah.
Best
Was it
life.
what you thought it would be? Like when you had said you kind of had your process, but like the writing process, was it what you anticipated?
I think it was because I've written for editors. I've written, papers for publications. So I kind of get that. It's something I've done. And I just write because I want to do it. I'm probably like you, I'm sure you have too. I've started many books before. Some just ended up being little hand Kinko's copy things that I give to friends and patients. And I've worked with editors, so I know how delightful it is to be in partnership with somebody, getting feedback and going back and doing a rewrite.
Otherwise, you're on your island just wanting to delete the whole manuscript.
On your island, wanting to delete the whole manuscript when you're 90% done with it.
Yes, I always joked with my husband. I was like, delete. I've been working on this paragraph for 3.5 hours. No.
Yeah.
So.
And I got good advice from somebody, a friend of my husband's, self-published. He does a lot of fiction writing. He writes really great fiction. And I was talking with him at a potluck and I said, oh, David, I'm going over this book now. I hate it. Every time I read it, all I can do is I just want to get rid of it because I know what I would do differently now. And he said, oh, it's time. You're done. That's how you feel when you're done with your book. I'm like, really? Yes.
That's
and
reassuring.
So him and then talking to Yvonne and Tom Yon said, this is normal. This is normal for authors. This is the normal process. So getting that just like we do with our patients, this is normal. Of course you feel this way. So this is the method. So Yvonne was actually able to walk me through, no, this is normal. What you're feeling is normal, but this is the method. Stick with it, Karen.
Yeah, that reassurance is so nice because you're just so far in it. And I think at that point, it's really hard to zoom out and you just don't know. So I love one thing that you did, like having the beta readers and sending it all out. And that was, yeah, I would imagine you had gotten some good feedback from that too.
You have no idea. People, my community really showed up for me. As you know, we have that practitioner community, and them and some patients and some just random people who follow me on YouTube said they would beta read. And I'm serious. People went through it with a fine-tooth comb, page by page, edits. And look, this was awkward. Use a different word for this. What were you talking about in this figure? I had a lot of work cut out for me. And how many people get to say that about their beta readers?
That's amazing. That's awesome. Yeah. And you've built such a wonderful community. I'm so thankful to be a part of it and learn something new every day. I have to say it's really brought me back to Facebook just because I have to go into the group and see, did somebody post something today? It's the only group that I will actively go out and seek and make sure that I didn't miss a single post. Yes.
I'm honored. I love that's Facebook for me too. It's special interest groups.
Exactly. Right. So thank you for, pulling me back from the void.
Or maybe I should apologize for you to pulling you back on Facebook.
Oh, no, it's all good. I can set good boundaries there. Good. But yes,
well
I feel so grateful to get some of your time today too, especially like post book launch. I know how busy things can get. So tell us, like, where can listeners find a little bit more about you? Where can they grab the book?
Right. So about me, my Hack Your Blood Sugar. So my website, hackyourbloodsugar.com, Hack Your Blood Sugar, it's on the label. YouTube, I have a YouTube channel where I post a lot of videos, a lot of how-tos and stuff. And then, of course, my book is Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. I think it's now bled out into the most online retailers. So most people get on Amazon, and anti-Amazon people usually go to Barnes & Noble, which is growing right now. So
very good. Yeah. Well, thank you. If there was one thing, like if somebody was they were inspired by today's conversation, they're like, oh my gosh, I think I need a CGM. If you had one piece of advice to leave them with, what would you say?
Do not try to flatten the curve right away. Collect data. Go into it like a scientist. And the scientist's first step is collect data and suspend judgment. Just collect some data and be curious.
Yes, I think you mentioned that too. Like, you put your lab coat on, you are your own scientist. And I think that's a really great approach because you know that you have to run experiments how many hundreds and thousands of times to get all the answers you never expected. So, yes. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today and look forward to getting this out to the people.
Yeah, and it was such a pleasure. I always love talking to you, Kayla. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.